Hi, my Break-Free Medicine friends. It's Dr. Sarah, and I am back with you for the final video of my CBD oil mega series. This was based on part 10 of my final review of CBD oil, Hype, Harm, or Heck Yeah, where we are discussing the clinical efficacy of CBD oil, specifically for the 3 most popular use areas based on survey and also what's been being studied in the literature. And these are in the areas of pain, mood, and neurological function. So I split the video into 2 parts. Last week we went into the efficacy of CBD oil for pain, so make sure you check that out if that is your area of interest. And today we're going to talk more about CBD oil for mood. Now remember, there's been 10 parts, so we've already covered a whole slew of topics if you're new to this. So you have lots of resources available, first of all, on the internet in general, but I really strive to make this an unbiased look at CBD oil and separate the fact from the fiction and what's actually in the literature. So there's been a lot of herbal darlings on the market, and CBD oil and hemp and cannabis is very popular and very well marketed right now, and actually one of the highest projections of financial stocks, I think, at this point. So just kind of buyer beware right now, because we got to consider biochemical individuality. We've got to consider the fact that some of the claims are based on animal and petri dish studies, which are different than human trials. And we have to consider standardization and quality isn't being as well monitored on the internet and products that you can buy as if you're purchasing them from a trusted supplier and someone your practitioner or an expert is aware of. So make sure that you are aware of this. Make sure that you're aware of some of the legal implications with CBD oil, because it's not technically legal in all states. Even though the Farm Bill did make hemp oil legal, it didn't make necessarily CBD, which is actually regulated by the FDA right now and a drug for seizure disorders. Didn't make that necessarily legal in your state. It all depends on the marijuana laws. We've discussed how cannabis, hemp, and CBD oil are different and how that relates to CBD oil and the efficacy and the mechanisms of action and the endocannabinoid system, which you might have heard about, which is what these different cannabinoids that are in a full spectrum hemp product and a cannabinoid, the THC that's in cannabis plants, they also hit this endocannabinoid system, which regulates a lot of different things in our bodies, from our neurotransmitters, immune system, modulating pain, modulating different systems like the bone health, all based on where the receptors are located. There's just so much to it. And then I've also been discussing the entourage effect, which is saying that the full spectrum cannabis plant, meaning the whole of the plant is greater than the sum of its parts. We've been studying a lot with the isolates, the most popular form being THC, the psychoactive component, which has been studied as a drug, as an isolate, synthetic versions on the market, as well as CBD, and those combinations in cannabis medicines. They have been found that when the two work together, even the 2 isolates, there's been more beneficial results than either one alone at lower dosages. What is now being studied is what happens if we actually take all of the cannabinoids, all of the essential oil that's present in the cannabis plant that contains this variety of terpenes that also have these synergistic actions, and look at those effects of a full spectrum product just as an isolate alone. That's the entourage effect. And then, you know, we've discussed the limitations of clinical trials and what that all means. So all of that is within the series. And now let's just, I'm going to trust that if you need more resources, including the updated medication interaction chart, and resources that I provided for you last week in the final review, that link is going to be, all of those links of the previous resources will be available in the accompanying article for this video. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but I do feel I need to legally tell you about the caveats of CBD oil before I discuss it. Okay? So let's get started. So as far as for CBD oil and mood, there have been different studies. Now, most of the studies are on how CBD oil actually helps stabilize the negative effects of THC. So again, I'm going to focus on these meta-analyses or reviews of clinical studies. I'm not going to just base what I'm telling you guys based on one or two studies. These are compilations of various clinical trials and looking at the evidence and if it was biased and what were the limitations and can you make a conclusions on all these studies based on the differences between these studies. That's known as heterogeneity. So all of those factors are important when you're evaluating a different clinical trial and a different modality, which is why medications can kind of be very expensive because all of these trials and all of these factors have to be accounted for. Okay. So in a review that looked at the neurological effects of CBD versus THC, they took 24 human and 21 animal neuroimaging studies. So they looked at the impact of CBD and THC on the brain. And what they did find overall is that THC and CBD had opposite neurophysiological effects. There was a smaller number of neurochemical imaging studies, and that did not affect, they did not say that there was an increased dopamine activity in THC-induced psychosis. So THC can have a psychoactive state if it goes too high. And they didn't feel that was related to dopamine. This is going to be different from pharmacological studies, which I'll discuss the study next. That was a clinical review of that. But that's what these researchers find, and they did admit there was a lot of differences between the trials, but that most of the evidence in human trials, again, it was going to be based on THC and CBD. And if you actually look at the study, they're having a very smaller dosage of these two cannabinoids when they're used together to create a decreased anxious state. Even though THC was in there, there was a balancing effect. And then there's also the fact that CBD oil at a higher dosage was found in acute trials. So we're talking after hours to decrease anxiety states in animals and rodents. So that's what that review found. And then a more recent review used 103 structural and functional brain studies in individuals with the use of cannabis, and they compared it to controls who didn't use cannabis. And I'm pulling up the article right now, so that's what I'm looking at on my screen, and it was really cool because they actually studied all different, it's 15 pages, I linked to it. They studied all different effects of cannabis on the brain. They had 18 structural studies, 5 studies that looked at the gray matter, 6 studies that looked at the white matter, so they're looking at the actual architecture of the brain and how those things are connected. They were looking at cognitive activation studies, decision-making studies, emotional processing, how it affects social cognition, cue and exposure and cravings, and 21 pharmacological studies. So they did a massive review and they went into detail, and I was just so happy. What they found in structural brain imaging studies is obviously cannabis affects the brain, and not necessarily for the better. There was a decrease in some of the brain issue areas of memory. and also of the fight or flight, the amygdala response, right? Now we know that essential oils actually help modulate the effect of the amygdala as well and help with mood balances there as far as helping someone deal with a fear response. They found that CBD, again, had altering effects than THC for the brain. Most of the studies were based on the THC effects, and they also looked at genetic associations and how this affected the brain, right? Because there's variants in your CBD receptors, or it's actually the cannabis receptor gene, sorry, CNR1. For those who are really geeky, it's RS2023239, if you look on your genetic analysis. But the CNR1 receptor, when there's variances in that, will also influence the changes on the brain of someone that doesn't have that variance in their genetics, as well as you might have heard of COMT, which is an enzyme for the elimination of dopamine. That gene polymorphism influenced the volume of different areas in cannabis versus control participants as well. So the neuroanatomical, the effects of the neurochemistry on the brain structure was related to these different genotypes, and that's associated with schizophrenia, which was related to, so basically we have all these different interacting factors, right? We even have genetic variances in how somebody has a receptor for cannabis, and how they use dopamine in their body is going to affect the how cannabis modulates their brain structure and function. Isn't that cool? I thought that was cool. And they also did studies with with CBD specifically, and what they found was, again, these were more short-term studies that it had an opposite effect. They looked at performance. Different areas of the brain, THC and CBD, were modulated, basically with learning, emotional processing, anxiety. Yeah, so those were the big ones. And also attention, I believe, yes. Opposite direction, again, for CBD and THC. So what they concluded overall in this is that basically changes in human brain, possibly protective, CBD possibly protective against some of the, quote, negative responses for THC. So, but remember, THC also has other, THC actually activates the cannabinoid receptors directly. CBD does not. It modulates the breakdown of different compounds that affect the endocannabinoid system, but doesn't affect it directly. So you could get benefit from both, and again, most of the studies are on both, but there's also negative side effects with just when you take one isolate and you don't have the balancing effects of the others. And this was found in the studies. There were also some clinical studies with a review of CBD for reducing different anxiety types of disorders, and they again found that neuroimaging findings provided evidence that it could affect reduced amygdala activation and altered the connection between the fear response in the brain to the prefrontal connectivity. But this is small sample sizes, and independent replication wasn't available. So it's currently limited, but it's promising that CBD has these effects. These are review articles, okay? So you're gonna, if you're on the web, Google, Dr. Google, and you search up and you find a study, and it says CBD was great in human clinical trials for anxiety, and you look, it's probably one study, and it's probably a short-term study. It's probably the one they most quote with stage fright, and it's probably a small trial, but it's going to be blown up, or it's going to be with animals. So again, these studies, don't, please don't get mad at me and then look online and find all these studies. I'm looking at reviews. So we're talking about like 24 studies. I just told you one with 103 studies. So these are reviews of the single studies. I'm getting a long wind in the tooth. So bottom line, again, is that when we dig into the findings, CBD does appear to have some promising effects on pain, some promising preliminary evidence for anxiety, especially short term. We know that there's getting more evidence about this entourage effect of full spectrum products. My blog this week was on cannabis essential oil, and I talked about the benefits of the terpenes that are found in the actual essential oil. And if you look at the charts that were provided, it actually shows that they have balancing effects that some people might be looking for in the CBD oil itself. So, for example, many people have heard of copaiba and B-caryophyllene, and that's been, I highlighted a study between the connection of these terpenes and phytocannabinoids, how they interact to modulate inflammation and pain, and that specific component that's found again in copaiba and black pepper essential oil was found to be one of the ones that they reported for inflammation and pain. I talked about copaiba before and how that B-caryophyllene specifically affects the CBD2 receptor, which has been studied for bone health and different effects on the endocannabinoid system again. We also, I also linked to my article on naturopath that talked about cannabis essential oils effects on the brain, calming, calming the electrical activity of the brain. They based that again on nervous system response on beta, caryophyllene, limonene, linalool, all these different constituents that are in the cannabis essential oil. So we got the synergy of the cannabis essential oil, the entourage of the cannabinoids, which also contains CBD in it, bam, in a full spectrum product. I'm a little biased just from looking at the studies on how that potentially might be better, but I want to see more clinical studies of that. That's what my final conclusion is. You can check for updates last week's article. I have, right now there's 27 clinical trials that were completed on clinicaltrials.gov that show CBD. Specifically for CBD, you can check updates for that. I've provided other resources if you want to follow this topic. And I'd be done with CBD for a while because I'm CBD cross-eyed. I need to get back to like my essential oils, driving on some other topics now because this has been like 11 weeks on this topic. Yeah, well, 10 because this week was cannabis essential oil, which, essential oil, right? Okay. So I'm out. I hope that was helpful for you guys. This is pretty long, but I wanted to dive deep into the literature, so to be as unbiased as possible. I was actually rereading an article today that I had read, I think with a bias before, because my opinion changed. I'm going to talk about that in an upcoming article, so stay tuned. It has to do with food and food addiction that I put in quotes. Intriguing. I will talk to you soon. Make sure if you're getting benefit, you comment, you blog, you like the videos. That would really help me out. And I will talk to you soon. Have a great, wherever you are, day, evening, night, whatever. Bye.